Hey guys, welcome to day 41 of 100 Days of Code. Now, in the upcoming modules, we've got something a little bit special for you. We're going to be learning about how to create websites using Python, as well as how to scrape websites for their data using tools like Beautiful Soup and Selenium. But before we can do that, we first have to fully understand the foundations, and that involves how to create websites with basic HTML. Before we get started doing all of these web-related Python things, I first want to make sure that you have a good foundation in constructing websites. Now, in order to create websites and to really understand how to work with websites, we first have to have a good, solid understanding of HTML and CSS, the building blocks of any modern website. So that's why over the next few days, I'm providing you access to the first 4 modules of my complete web development bootcamp. This is the highest rated web development course across Udemy and the internet, and it will provide you with all of the skills that you'll need in order to fully understand how a website is constructed from scratch. Over the next 4 days, you're going to be learning introductory and intermediate HTML, as well as introductory and intermediate CSS. And these two can be considered another 2 additional programming languages. But don't worry, I'm going to guide you through step by step how these 2 languages work and how you can use them to construct beautiful websites. One of the first websites you're going to be building today is a CV website. So somewhere that you can put onto the internet all of your skills and your education, and you can send to any potential employer, not only saving trees, but also demonstrating your skills. In the course, you'll see that the code editor I'm using is Atom. So you can, if you want to, head over to atom.io and download the version for your operating system. However, remember that you already have a really powerful code editor. In fact, it goes beyond a code editor. It's an intelligent development environment, PyCharm. And you can create websites in PyCharm just as easily as you create Python projects. All you have to do is create a new project as you have done, and then create a new file. And depending on the file type, so for example, if we want to create an HTML file, then we'll add the .html ending to the file. And if you want to create a CSS file, it's also as simple as creating something .css. Now, when you create your index.html file, as you're creating your website by writing HTML code, you can actually view your website by clicking on the browser of your choice, and it'll show you your live website, which is a really neat touch. And it's something that you won't get with simpler tools like Atom. But Atom is free to download as well, so if you wanted to give it a spin, then feel free to do that. The final alternative, and the one that you're probably already familiar with, is you could also just create your project in Replit by simply searching for HTML, CSS, JS, and this will be your new Replit project. And here you can create any type of new file, HTML, JavaScript, or CSS, and you'll have some starting code to work with, which will make it a little bit easier. So the choice is yours, PyCharm, Replit, or Atom. It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it comes more down to what code you write and understanding how the code works rather than which tool you decide to use. So I'll leave the choice up to you. And in the next lesson, we're going to get started by learning about how the internet works. Hi guys, it's Angela from the Appbury, and in this lesson we're going to deep dive into how exactly does the internet actually work. Because here's this thing that we use every single day and we completely take it for granted. So before we start developing awesome websites and web apps for people to access through the internet, it's really important that we understand the fundamentals of how the internet actually works. So what exactly is the internet? Well, a lot of people think of it as a cloud, something that's hanging around in the sky. It's super complex, super difficult to understand, but actually that's not it at all. The internet is really simple. All it is just a long piece of wire, and the wire connects different computers to each other. So you might have one computer that's in Seattle and another computer that's in London, and they can talk to each other and transfer data through this giant wire. Now, some of these computers attached to the internet have a very special job. They have to be online 24/7, ready to serve you all of the data and the files that you are requesting when you try to access websites. And the computers that are doing that job, we would call a server. And the computers that any user would use to access the internet is called a client. Now, you can imagine a web server as a giant library that's open 24/7. And you can go in there at any hour of the day and request, I want to see Google's homepage, or I want to see the latest post on TechCrunch. And it would be able to serve you with all of the files and data that you would need to be able to view whatever website it is that you requested. Now, you can imagine if there's a library that's big enough to house all of these websites, then it's going to be pretty difficult to quickly locate the thing that you want out of this giant library, right? So how is this problem solved on the internet? Well, let's say that you're sitting at home on your computer and you type in google.com because you want to head over to the main Google homepage. What happens behind the scenes is that your browser will send a message to your internet service provider. So these are the people who you pay to be able to access the internet. And if you're in the US, that's a company like AT&T or Comcast. And if you're in the UK, then that would be something like BT or TalkTalk. Now, the message that you're sending the ISP is, I want to see google.com. And the ISP will then relay that message to something called a DNS server, a domain name system server. And a DNS server is essentially just a souped up phone book. And what happens when you make that request through your browser is the DNS server will look up in its database as to what is the exact IP address of that website that you're trying to access. And every single computer that's connected to the internet has an IP address. This is like a postal address for your computer, so that when people need to send and receive files on the internet, each computer can be located by their unique IP address. And once the DNS server finds the IP address, it sends that back to your browser. So now you know the exact address where you can find the Google homepage. The next thing that happens is you will send a direct request to that address through your internet service provider. And this message will be delivered via what's called the internet backbone. Now, the internet backbone isn't some sort of analogy for some clever programming. It's literally the backbone of the internet. And if you head over to submarinecablemap.com, you can view all of the underwater cables that power the internet. And the internet is made up of these huge, sprawling masses of wires connecting all of the world's internet users. As you can imagine, it's a pretty complex world out there. Now, if I'm sitting in London and I want to see a website that's hosted in the United States, then my browser would have to make a request that goes through one of these cables under the Atlantic Ocean in order to reach the United States. And once that computer has received my request, they'll send back all of the relevant data again through these giant cables. And to navigate all of this crazy underwater and above water wires, all I have is an IP address. It's like as if I'm sending a letter halfway across the world, and my only hope for my letter to reach my friend is that postal address on the front of the envelope. So once I've gotten the IP address of the website that I want to access, then my browser sends another message through the internet service provider via the internet backbone to the server that is located at that address, 216.582.10.46. And the computer that's located at that address is, of course, the Google server. And on this server, there's all of the files that I would need in order to be able to view the Google homepage. The server then sends all of those files back to me through the internet backbone, and I get to see the Google homepage in my browser. And all of that happens in a matter of milliseconds. And just to imagine the journey that my data has gone on, traveling through the world thousands of times per day. So why don't you give it a go? Open up your browser and type in 216.58.210.46 and hit enter to see the Google homepage being served up to you through the internet. Now that we've spoken about how the internet works, in this episode, I want to talk about how exactly do websites work? What exactly does HTML, CSS, and JavaScript do exactly? Now, in order to access a web page, we all know that you need a browser, right? And that can be Chrome, Safari, Firefox, whatever is your favorite one. These are all pieces of software that allow you to look up the IP address of your website and be able to receive data that it can render into these beautiful websites that we see. Now, the data that you receive from the server usually consists of 3 types of files: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's very likely that you would have come across these types of files or these words before, because they're so common and they're so integral to how websites work. But what exactly do they do, and why are there so many different types of files? Why can't we just have one file that's, a website? Well, they actually have very different jobs. The HTML code file is responsible for the structure of your website. So if a website was a house, then the HTML would be the builder who would come in to build the walls or put in a toilet. Basically, they establish the structure of your house. And when you write HTML code, you also build up the structure of your website. So you could use HTML to add an image or a button or a text box, whatever it is that you need in your website. Now, the second type of file are CSS files. And these files are responsible for styling your website. If you were building a house, then this would be the painters and decorators. They would be going around painting the walls or adding stylistic flourishes to your place and generally making the place look the way that you want it to. And that's exactly what CSS code does as well. When you incorporate CSS, it allows you to specify how you want your website to look. So you could say that, yes, I have a button that I got from my HTML, but that button, I want it to be red, and I want the text to be white, and I want the font of the text to be in Arial. That is all done using CSS code. Now, the final component is the JavaScript code. And this is the code that allows your website to actually do things or have behavior. And if you were building a house, you would have the electrician come in who would be able to connect the wires so that your light bulbs actually switch on. Or somebody who comes in and does the plumbing so that your toilet can actually flush. And the JavaScript code does exactly that. It allows your website to actually do things and have behavior. So if we take the Google website as an example again, once we receive these files from Google's server, when our browser loads up the HTML files, we'll get to see the structure of the website. Namely, there's one image, which is their logo, there's 2 buttons, and there's a text box where we can enter our search. Now, when we receive the CSS files, then that will modify the appearance of all of those components. We don't have any more buttons or any more images, but they now look the way that Google wanted it to. And finally, when we incorporate the JavaScript files, then our website actually starts having behavior. It has functionality and it's actually able to do something rather than just display some images and text to us. Now, with the knowledge that we've already acquired, we can already start messing around with websites on the internet. So open up Chrome and head over to TechCrunch.com. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a technology news website where I get my latest tech news. Once you're over here, I want you to right-click on the title here and click on Inspect. Now, this brings up the Chrome Developer Tools, and we're going to be exploring this in a lot more detail. But for now, we're going to use it to do something really simple. You can see that when I right-click on that heading and click Inspect, it automatically opens up the entire code file that was used to render this website. So these are all of the elements that make up this website. And when you click on Inspect, it will highlight to you the part of the code that corresponds to the thing that you right-clicked, right? In this case, it's this title. And inside this title, you can see that there is a link, which means that when you click on it, it'll go to another web page, but it's also got a bit of text. So right inside Chrome Developer Tools, if you double click on the bit of text that corresponds to the title, you can actually edit it. So let's go ahead and change the front page of TechCrunch. Let's say something like So this is a great way of pranking your friends, especially when they can see that you're on TechCrunch.com and the title or any of the text on the website is what you want it to say. And this is a great joke to play on friends who are maybe not quite as technologically advanced as you because they haven't taken the course that you have. Now, unfortunately, when I hit refresh on this website, all of my good work is gone. And the reason is because when I'm editing it here, inside my browser, I'm actually changing the local copy of this file that I got back from the servers. But when I click refresh, then that makes a new request to the servers to load up a fresh copy of the website. So of course, then it updates to the original content. But in the coming lessons, we're going to be working with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so that you can create and host live on the internet your very own websites. And through learning how to code and how to build websites, you're going to be able to make websites that say anything that you want it to, look the way that you want it to, and have the functionality that you need. So for all of that and more, I'll see you in the next lesson. All right, so now let's tackle what exactly is HTML and how do we use it to structure our websites. So no matter what you use as your browser, it could be Chrome, it could be Safari or Firefox, they all have a single purpose, and that's to interpret your files, such as your HTML files, your CSS files, your JavaScript files, into a website that should be displayed. For example, we've got a little bit of HTML code here that says that our website should have a title called Hello, and in the body, there should be a heading that says Hello World. So if we pass that code into our browser, it will open it and display it like so, with the title of the website usually on the tab bar, and that H1 or that big heading showing up in the body of our website. So before we dive deep into this, it's really important to remember that HTML is the foundation of all websites. So, for example, you won't see websites that are created using just a CSS file or just a JavaScript file, but you can create websites using just an HTML file. Now, it might not look great. It'll probably look like it came from the 90s, but it does enable your website to display text or various elements such as images or forms or tables, depending on how you code up the HTML file. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the really important part here is the word markup, because there's many markup languages. For example, you might have heard of things such as XML, Extensible Markup Language, or GML, Generalized Markup Language. And all of these languages share a common history. They're based off the markup that used to be put into manuscripts, where editors would mark up the manuscript and either specify changes to the author or specify structure and layout to the publishers. So for example, you might have the squiggly line that shows the publishers that this part should be printed in bold or this part should be printed in italics. And HTML works in much the same way. You can specify the layout and structure of your website by using HTML tags. So if you head over to your browser and go to a website called codepen.io, then we can have a look and have a play around with real live HTML. So you don't have to sign up, just head over to codepen.io and then hit create new pen. And then we're going to change the view to a format like this. So this is the live version of our website. And these are the places where we're going to put our code. So as you can see, CodePen lets you put in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which will together get interpreted and get shown on the left as your website. Now, as we're only working with HTML at the moment, I'm going to minimize the CSS and JavaScript sections, and I'm just going to work from the HTML section. Now, we're going to need some text to work with, or to have something which we can give structure to. If you head over to gutenberg.org/ebook/1661, you get taken to The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. So one of my favorite books of all time. If you have a look down here, you can see that you can view the book as plain text, or you can read this book online as HTML. So this is what the plain text looks like. It has all of the text in the book, but absolutely no structure. But when we have a look at the HTML file, you can see that it has laid out the book with a structure that is more human readable. And this is what we're going to replicate using HTML. So if you go ahead and just copy this part, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you copy it and place it into your pen, so in the HTML section here. Now, you can see that all of this text gets put onto the screen with absolutely no structure. And in order for this to start looking like this, we're going to start adding a little bit of HTML. So the first thing we can see is that this is the largest heading on the page. So we can make our website look like that also by adding an H1 tag into our HTML. So the tags start with angular brackets and end with angular brackets, and in the middle is the type of element or the type of tag you want to use. Now, it's really important that when you open tags that you should also close them, because as you can see here, I've got an open tag, but I have yet to close it, and it thinks that the entire contents of my page should be made into the largest heading possible. And that's not what I want. I only want it for this section, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So in order to close the tag, it's the same angle brackets, but then I have to use a / and then write H1. So now only this part is an H1 or a large heading. Now, if we have a look at the other parts, I would say that this word by is a little bit smaller than the author name. So let's structure this as a heading also, but let's make it a subtitle. So let's make it a slightly smaller heading. And to do that, we can simply wrap this text around an H2 tag. And now we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as a heading, but in a smaller size and shown with less importance than the big title. So now, finally, we have this word by, and I reckon that's one size smaller than this heading. So let's go ahead and wrap this inside an H3. I hope you're starting to get the gist. The heading tags get smaller as the number goes up. So for example, if I change this to an H4, it gets even smaller, H5, smaller still, and all the way until H6, which is the smallest font size for the heading element. Now, if you keep going to H7, you'll notice that it doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't change the heading size. And that's because the heading elements only go from H1 to H6. Now, how do I know that, I hear you ask? So this is a good point in the course to introduce documentation. And the reason why I'm talking about it so early on is because of how important it is to your journey as a web developer. So one of the key skills in becoming a great web developer, or in fact any sort of programmer, is getting good at finding out how you can help yourself. And a lot of that involves getting good at Googling. How do you find the specific piece of information that's going to help you achieve what it is that you want, or help you understand what it is that you want to know? So in this case, we're talking about headings, and we are using HTML. And I'm going to add in the name of the documentation that I prefer to use, which is MDN, and it stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. So the same people who made Firefox, for example. So if I go ahead and hit enter, you see a whole bunch of results come up. And the most relevant for us is the H1 to H6, and it talks about headings. So if we click on that, you can learn more about the heading elements used in HTML. And they even have example code snippets that show you what it would look like rendered in a browser. Now, there's a couple of sources for documentation. One is, of course, MDN. Another one is called W3 Schools. So let's see if we try W3 Schools with HTML, and we're talking about headings, right? Let's see what we get here. So HTML headings is the first result that comes up. And similarly, you've got the code examples, you've got the results, and you've got a little bit of notes that tell you how you should be using your headings. Both of these places have a lot of really useful usage notes. and it's worth reading through when you're first coming across a particular element. That way, you'll have a good foundation of knowledge when you start to build and create your own websites. So I want to show you one last resource that I quite like using, which is called devdocs.io. And this is basically a website that puts together a lot of the useful documentation in a structure that I find to be quite handy. So if we have a look inside the HTML5 tab and we go into the elements, we can see that there's a total of 135 elements. And if you scroll down, you can see that we've got H1 through to H6. And if you click on any of these, then it brings up actually the MDN documentation. So you can see that it's similar to what we saw in MDN, but it's just structured in a very simple way and it's very easy to follow. So that's definitely a website that's worth bookmarking. So if we head back over to our HTML file, we're going to change that back to an H3, which is an HTML tag that actually exists as opposed to something like H9. So the next thing that we need to do in order to better replicate this website is to add some space between these lines. Now in a word processor such as Word or Google Docs, you'll be able to simply just hit enter a few times or hit return a few times and get that spacing show up. Now unfortunately in HTML it doesn't quite work like that. It's a little bit more complicated. In order to create that spacing, we actually have to use an HTML element called a line break, and it's written like so. And the interesting thing about this HTML element is that it doesn't require both an open and a close tag. So when we had the H1 through to H6 tags, you can see that we started out by marking the text with an H1 and then we closed it off with a closing tag. But the line break element works all by itself, and you can even put it inside like so to make this part go onto a new line. Now, this is a good time point to review the anatomy of HTML tags. All right, so let's talk about the anatomy of an HTML tag and break it down to its component parts so that we can actually understand how they're structured and how we can use them. So we've written HTML elements like so. So here we have the words hello world, and they're enclosed by an opening tag and a closing tag. And in between those tags is the content that we want to apply that structure to. So if you think back to the days of marking down a manuscript, it's exactly the same as putting down a squiggly line underneath certain words or phrases and asking the publisher to make it bolded to affect the structure of certain parts of the text. Now in this case, the publisher just happens to be our browser. So these tags make requests to the browser asking it to structure and display our plain text in the way that the web designer wanted it to be shown. Now the other type of tag that we just saw are tags that don't have a closing tag. They're expressed simply like so. And these are called self-closing tags. And we've seen that with the break tag, and there's a few more others that work like this also. Now, how do we find out if something requires a closing tag or is self-closing? Well, this is where we head to the documentation again. So if we have a look at the documentation for the heading elements, you can see that there's this part in the table that says tag omission, and it says that both the starting and ending tags are mandatory so that you can specify which portion of your text you want to apply this structure to. Now, if we have a look at the BR or the line break element, you can see that under tag omission, it says that it must have a start tag and must not have an end tag. So this is how we find out how we write our tags. Now, while we're here, I want to introduce you to another element called the horizontal rule, or the HR tag. And this will allow us to create these horizontal lines above and below our portion of text. So as you can see in the documentation, under tag omission, it also says that it must not have an end tag. So this is also a self-closing tag. Let's head back over to our pen so that we can add these two horizontal rules above and below our text. So the first one is going to go here, and the last one is going to go here. you can see that our web page now has two horizontal lines above and below our main portion of text. Now, if we have a closer look at this website, you can see that their horizontal rule is a little bit thicker than ours. So how can we make ours look more like theirs? Now, this is the part where I show you a neat trick. On any web page that you open in Chrome, you can simply right-click on the element that you're interested in and click Inspect in order to look at the HTML and CSS code that's being rendered in the background by the browser. So you can see here, they've got an HR element, horizontal rule, but they've got also all of this going on afterwards. What exactly is that? Now we know that the first part of the tag is the HTML element, and it's BR or HR, whatever it is that you want to use. Now the second part inside the angle bracket or inside our tag is new, and this is called an HTML attribute, and it basically gives more information to the browser to specify modifications to that HTML element. So in this case, we're saying that we want a horizontal rule, but we want it in size 3. Now, what does size 3 mean? And how do we know that we have these HTML attributes available to us? You've guessed it, we're going back to the documentation. Now, I know I'm making a big deal about going to the documentation, but it really is an important skill. Understanding and being able to look up the documentation, being familiar with the structure of it and where to look in order to find out how to implement or do certain things. If we have a look at our documentation for HR, you can see that there's this section called attributes, and that's what we spoke about just now. The attribute comes after the main HTML element and is separated from the element by a single space. In this case, the horizontal rule element has actually quite a few attributes, including a line, so you can specify whether if you want your horizontal line to align to the left or align to the right or be centered. You can specify the color of the horizontal rule. You can set whether if you want the horizontal rule to have shading or not, and you can also set the height in pixels of that horizontal rule, which is what we saw earlier on over here. So in this case, the reason why their horizontal rule looks different to ours is because ours is by default only 1 pixel high or 1 pixel in size, whereas theirs, if you inspect in the HTML, is 3 pixels in height. And they've also specified no shade, i.e. no shading to the horizontal rule. So if we want to make our website a seamless copy of what we see here, then we also have to specify those attributes. So if you remember, the horizontal rule is a self-closing tag. And so inside the tag, we're going to make a space, and then we're going to specify the name of the attribute, which we know from the documentation to be called the size attribute. And we're going to set it to equal 3 pixels. And then we're going to specify that it is no shade, i.e. no shading. And we know all of this from the documentation. So now, once our code updates, you can see that this brand new horizontal rule looks completely different from what it was before, and we can copy this over to the top as well, so that our horizontal rules look exactly the same as what we've got over here. So now we've seen HTML elements that require an opening tag as well as a closing tag. We've also seen HTML elements that have a self-closing tag. And finally, we've seen that HTML elements can also have an attribute where you can specify modifications to the default element. Now, all we need is just to add one final tag called center to our HTML file, and we would have now faithfully copied what this website looks like. So you can have a look through the HTML by, remember, right-clicking and inspecting in Chrome, and you can look through to see how they've structured the rest of the document as well. Now, this is a good point to mention our first challenge. So we've got this code pen now where we've been messing around with the HTML. Now you can either save this anonymously or you can create a free account in CodePen in order to be able to access this later on. But I want you to create a brand new pen. And this pen is going to be our code playbook. And you're going to use this document as an interactive notebook, if you will. And I want you to document here all the new things that you've learned as we progress through the course. For example, in this and the last lesson, we learn about the H1 tag. So in our code playbook, the first thing that's going to go in is your H1 tag. And you can say that this is a level 1 heading created using the H1 tag. We can go ahead and close it off. And you can look through the documentation to perhaps copy some of these code snippets over, but make sure that whenever you're copying, pasting code, that you understand what the code does. There's nothing worse than copy and pasting code that breaks your website because you didn't understand what you've put in there. So we can go ahead and then modify each of these so that when we're creating our own websites and we want to come back to our playbook and have it as a point of reference, then we'll be able to see easily at a glance all of the elements that we've used and that we've learned about before. So my challenge to you is to create your very own code playbook and to start keeping notes on all the things that you're learning in this course. Now, sometimes with certain elements, for example, the line break, you won't be able to put any text inside the line break in the same way that we've done so for the H1 tag. This is a point where you can use a comment instead in your HTML file. Comments are portions of text which are marked out to be ignored by the browser. And they're usually places where you write notes to yourself or notes to fellow programmers who might be looking at your code. So in HTML, we create a comment by using the angle bracket, a exclamation mark, 2 dashes, and then to close off the comment, we use another 2 dashes and a closing angle bracket. And everything in between here is a comment. You can see that usually it gets highlighted in a different color, and none of it gets interpreted into the web page. So this is where you can put sections for your notes. For example, self-closing tags. You can make it into several paragraphs just by putting the closing tag at the bottom. And you can write notes on the elements as we come across them and keep this for your own reference. By the time when you're ready to create your own website, it will be a goldmine of a resource to jog your memory on all of the lessons that you've learned. So in the next lesson, we're going to be building our very first website. And it's going to be really, really awesome because we're going to be using a real text editor and we're going to be putting that website live onto the internet. So there's all of that and more yet to come. So I will see you on the next lesson. All right, so in this lesson, we're going to be building our very first website. Now, because we've only talked about HTML so far, so how to structure websites using HTML elements, and we haven't yet gotten to the part where we've learned about styling using CSS, then we're kind of limited in terms of the kind of websites that we can make. But fear not. Our websites are going to be right up there with the internet titans, but just way back in 1997. So do you remember what Yahoo looked like when it first launched? Or do you remember what Google looked like when it first came out? No? Don't remember? Well, there's a great website that can show you exactly that. And it's called the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. And you can find it at web.archive.org. Now in here, if you just enter the URL of a website that you're interested in, say yahoo.com, then it shows you what this website looks like all the way from 1996 to current day, which is 2017. Now let's have a look at what Yahoo looked like originally on the first day it was crawled, so 17th of October, 1996. So let's go ahead and click on that snapshot. And this is exactly what it looks like. So if we close off this frame, you can see it's almost like as if you've time traveled back to 1996 when Yahoo first launched and you were visiting this website for the first time. Now, as you can see, most of this is just pure HTML. It's a lot of structure and a lot of formatting, but it looks really ugly. But it's okay because it's a great place to get started with. This is the sort of website that we're going to be building by the end of this module. Now, I hear you say, oh, but this looks terrible. Surely nobody builds websites like this anymore. Well, this is an interesting anecdote that you might not know. If you have a look at some of the world's top computer science professors and you look at their personal pages that they've built, they all look a little bit like this, not so dissimilar from the websites in 1996. So this is Thomas Corman, who's a serious algorithm guy. And this is a website of John Kleinberg, another huge name computer science professor. And of course, the king himself, Donald Knuth, has a website that looks like this. So if it's good enough for these computer science titans, then it's probably good enough also for our very first website. By the end of this module, we're going to build a website that looks much like this. Something that we can put up online to show what we've done, our CV, as well as our hobbies and things that we like to do. So you can use it as a personal site or somewhere to list your CV online. I hope you're excited because I'm super excited. And once you're ready, let's go ahead and create our very first website. Now, once you're ready, go ahead and open up the Atom editor. Now, if you haven't yet installed Atom, this is a good point to go back and have a look at those videos on how to install Atom for Mac or for Windows. Because from here on out, we're going to be working with the Atom editor to create every single one of our websites. So it's really, really important that you have it set up with all the packages that we've specified in those installation videos. But once you've got it installed and opened, you should be looking at a screen like this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to File and we're going to open a new project folder to work out of. So I want you to create a new folder, either in your desktop or somewhere else that you prefer, and it's going to be called Web Development. Go ahead and hit Create, and then select that web development folder and go ahead and click Open. And now you'll see your project folder show up in the sidebar over here, and you can toggle it closed by clicking on that arrow button over there. So now that we've got our web development folder, this is where we're going to store all of our projects. The first project that we're going to be creating is our personal website. So go ahead and right-click on the web development folder, and we're going to create a new folder inside the web development folder. And we're going to call our project HTML personal site. And now we're ready to create our very first HTML file inside this folder. So again, right-click on this tab, and we're going to create a new file. Now, as you get used to Atom, you're going to start to want to use some of their shortcuts. So for example, instead of right-clicking and selecting new file, you can also just simply select the HTML personal site and hit A in order to do the same thing. But in the beginning, as you're getting used to Atom, I'm going to be using a lot of the mouse controls so that you can see what's happening on screen. But feel free to start incorporating the shortcuts into your workflow. And as time goes on, you'll find that they make life so much quicker and so much easier. So now we're going to create our very first file. And you can see the way that the files are structured is that we're creating it inside this folder called HTML personal site. And inside that folder is where our web page is going to be located. Let's go ahead and create this home page. And by convention, we're going to name it index.html. And that is usually the name that developers will give their home page. So go ahead and hit enter in order to create that file. And if you open up this folder, you can see that's exactly where it's located. And it should open up on the right hand or the main pane over here as well. Now, in order to create any HTML website, there's a little bit of boilerplate code that's associated. Now, you can either write it all out, or because we installed the Emmet plugin, we can simply write HTML and then hit enter, and it will insert all of that boilerplate code for us. Now, if that didn't work for you, you could also hit the tab key after writing HTML or typing an exclamation mark and then hitting the tab or the enter key. Try some of these combinations that you see on screen if it's not working for you. And you're going to come to see and appreciate all of the powers of the Atom plugins and how helpful they can be. So now we mentioned that this is a standard HTML boilerplate code. Now in programming, we talk about boilerplates quite frequently, and it's similar to having a code template, something that you'll reuse for different projects, and it comes from the days when the printing press would make these heavy iron plates that would function as their printing template. And because they looked very similar to the small metal plate that identified the builder of a steam boiler, they called it the boilerplate. That's just where this word comes from. But when we're talking about it in programming, we usually mean a code template that you can reuse. Now, even though we didn't have to do very much work in order to get all of this into our file, it would still be a shame to lose it, right? So in Atom, whenever you see a blue dot on the tab bar of your file, that means that there's unsaved progress. And in order to make it disappear and to keep your progress, you can simply go to File and then click on Save, or use whatever shortcut that shows up for you over here. It should be Command S on Mac, and it should be Control S on Windows. For those of you who are interested, I've included a link to some of the most commonly used Atom keyboard shortcuts, and includes the commands for both Mac, Windows, and Linux for users of all three platforms. So go and have a look over there and start learning and using some of these shortcuts. And once you've saved your file in Atom, you'll see that little blue dot disappear, and now you can be rest assured that all your progress has now been safely saved. Now there's quite a lot of stuff on the screen, so let's talk about this boilerplate line by line to understand what it all does. So the first line here is where we declare the document type, and this tells the browser when it opens up this file what is the version of HTML that we're using. Now in this course, we're working with the latest version of HTML, which is HTML5. Now in previous versions of HTML, this doc type was incredibly convoluted. And in fact, I can show you what some of them look like. So we can write HTML for T, for example. And then because we've installed Emmet, if I hit Tab, you can see this is what the boilerplate code for a particular HTML4 version would look like. And you can see that doc type is a lot longer, and very often programmers won't be able to remember that, so they actually have to look it up somewhere. But since HTML5, the doc type declaration became a lot simpler, and now it's just !doc_type HTML, and this tells the browser to render this file as an HTML5 document. And there's a few differences between how things will appear or how things will be structured depending on whether if the doc type was HTML5 or a previous version. So that's the doc type. Now we inserted all of this code using autocomplete from Emmet. And if you want to look at all the other things that you can do with Emmet, then you can go ahead and have a look at docs.emmet.io/cheat sheet. And here you can see what all of those abbreviations look like and what is the result of it. As you're developing into a professional web developer, it's a great resource to have in order to save yourself a lot of time when you get used to using these common shortcuts. Now the next line in our code is an HTML tag, and this tells the browser that everything in between the opening and closing tags is going to be HTML code. And what does that code consist of? Well, it consists of a head and a body. Now the head is the part of the HTML file that holds information about the web page, and it tells the browser how it should handle the page. So for example, we might have a title tag in here that tells the browser what is the title of this particular document or this particular page. So let's go ahead and give our website a title. Let's call it whatever your name is. So mine is Angela, Angela's personal site. And now if we go ahead and hit save, we can have a look at it inside our browser. Now there's a couple of ways how you can open up the website that you're coding up inside your browser. Now one of these ways is simply going into your Finder or your Explorer and finding that index.html file and then double clicking on it, and it should bring it up inside Chrome. Now the other way of opening up your website is if you right click on your file inside Atom and you go to copy full path, then it copies the entire directory path to the location of your website. So if you just go ahead and paste it into the bar here, And here with this file path, we're telling the browser how to find this file index.html on our computer. So first we're telling it to go into a folder called users. Then we're telling it to go into a folder called Angela U. Then we're saying go to desktop. And then inside desktop, we're going to web development. And finally, we're going to HTML-personal site. And that is where we're going to find that index.html site. Let's go ahead and hit enter on that file path in order to do exactly the same as double-clicking on this file, which is opening up our website inside Chrome. Now, if Chrome is not your default browser, then when you see the icon, it's not going to have the Chrome symbol here. So you can change that by going into your settings, then scrolling down to default browser in order to change it. Now, at the moment, our website doesn't contain any content yet, but it does have a title, which you can see here. And it says Angela's personal site, which is what we created over here. Now, inside the head section, there's also this meta element. Now, there's quite a few different meta elements, but this particular one is called character set. And the one that we're setting it to is UTF-8. Now, what does this line do? The meta elements give extra metadata or associated data to your HTML document. And in this case, we're telling the browser when it opens up this file that all the text inside our web page is encoded using the UTF-8 encoding system. So this is basically a list of all the available characters that we can use inside our website for it to be rendered correctly. Now, sometimes when you open up a web page, especially in an outdated browser like Internet Explorer or an email that you got from a Bulgarian friend, you might see some of the characters being jumbled up like this. And this is called mojibake. And it's a Japanese word that stands for characters that are transformed. And it occurs because your browser is trying to render the characters using the wrong character set. So, for example, if we have a look at this Wikipedia page for mojibake in Japanese, you can see that currently my browser is set to render all the web pages as Unicode, which is very similar to UTF-8. And you can see that everything looks pretty legit. It all looks more or less like Japanese. But if I decide to change the encoding of my browser and for it to interpret all the websites as something else, say Arabic, then you can see that all of this web page is now messed up. This is not a valid word, and none of this has any meaning because it's encoded the website incorrectly. So there's quite a few different types of encoding, and they're specialized for different languages because different languages use different symbols. For example, if you have a look at the Windows Greek symbol chart, then you can see that the symbol at position 224 looks like this. But if you have a look at the chart for Windows Arabic, then 224 actually encodes a completely different character. And that's why we get these messed up websites or strange looking emails when it's interpreted using the wrong encoding. Now, UTF-8 is the standard encoding that you should be using when working with HTML5. And the reason for that is because it includes all of those international symbols. And in fact, every single symbol that is included in the Unicode character set. So if you go to unicode-table.com, then you can see a table of all of the Unicode characters. And if you scroll down, it's got this nice little animation that shows you as we change locations, going from Latin, so most of the English-speaking countries, to Greek and Coptic, then going to Armenian, Hebrew, Arabic, and all of the different languages. The other thing about Unicode is that it also includes emojis. For example, if you have a look at the emoji chart, let's look for heart symbols, for example, then we've got all of these different emoji characters that we can also use on our website that's encoded with UTF-8. So let's go ahead and give that a try. Let's find a nice looking heart symbol. We can right click to copy it or hit Command C or Control C. and we can paste it to the front of our website title using Control V or Command V. And now if I hit save and go back to my website and hit Command R or Control R to refresh, or click this refresh button here, then you can see our title is updated with that emoji. So everything that is Unicode can be encoded correctly using UTF-8, and it's something that you should just have as your boilerplate code for any new website you create. This gives your website the maximum chance of being rendered correctly on browsers that are from international visitors. Now, if you're interested in doing a bit of background reading and learning more about Unicode and character sets, then this is a really good piece that I highly recommend by Joel Spolsky. It's a roughly 10-minute read, and it talks a lot about these character sets and how they encode different symbols and why you should be using something like Unicode or UTF-8 in your websites in order to ensure maximum compatibility. So it's a good read, and I'll include a link to it in the resources for this lesson. Now, aside from the character set attribute for the meta element, there's also other attributes that you might see on different websites. So some of the common ones include description, or things like keywords about your website, who the author is, as well as viewport. And these meta tags tell the browser how it should render or display the web page. And also they give information to search engines about the content of the website. So for example, if we go to the Mozilla MDN WebDocs website, the main page, developer.mozilla.org, and we right click and we view page source, then we get to see the entire HTML file that's used to render this particular page. So this is what our browser sees and does all the hard work of making it look nice and pretty like this for us. So here, if you go ahead and hit Command F or Control F on Windows, you can search for the description attribute. Now, it's not this first one, but it is this third one, and it's this exact thing. And the description says, the Mozilla Developer Network, MDN, provides information about open web technologies, including HTML, CSS, and APIs. Now, if we go into Google and we search for MDN, you can see that the snippet of text that it shows about the main MDN website is exactly the same as what we saw just here in the description meta tag. And this is what search engines do. They crawl the HTML of your website and look for certain meta tags in order to know what your website is about and also how to display it in their search index. And there's a whole bunch of different attributes for the meta element, and you can have a read about it either on W3 Schools or what I recommend usually is the MDN WebDocs. So if you have a look at meta over here, then you can learn all about the different attributes, how to use them, and what they're good for. In the next lesson, we're going to be tapping into our body section, and we're going to be creating the content for this personal site of ours. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. So now that we understand how the HTML boilerplate works and what each line does in it, it's time to move into the body section and start giving our website some content. Because at the moment, our website is looking a little bit plain. So if we have a look at John Kleinberg's website, the first thing that we want right at the top here is a level 1 heading that says our name. So let's head back into Atom, and as a challenge to you, add a level 1 heading inside the body section of your website that contains your name. So this one's easy, and it's made even easier using the autocomplete features inside Atom. All I have to write in order to create an H1 tag, which is what's needed to create a level 1 heading, is I just have to write H1, and it makes a suggestion asking me, are you looking for heading level 1? And now if I hit enter or if I hit tab, I get the H1 tag inserted automatically, opened and closed for me, and my cursor gets moved right in between exactly the place where I would need to start typing. So now if I hit save and I head back over to my personal site. And remember, if you close down this tab, you can always go into your Finder or your Explorer to open it back up again, or you can select the full file path from Atom as well and paste it into here. Now, if I hit enter, you can see my H1, my level 1 heading gets shown up here, just like John Kleinberg's, and we're ready to move on to the next thing. Now, we want to have a line that shows our title, so who it is that we are. Let's head back to Atom. And firstly, I'm going to get rid of this little heart because it doesn't look very professional. And I'm going to add another HTML element under the H1. And this is a good point to talk about how to keep your HTML file neat and tidy. Now, most programmers are very serious about how to indent and structure their HTML files. And the reason for it is because having these indents makes it easy for us to see at a glance which tags are inside other ones. So for example, if we look at the top level here, we've got the HTML tag. And because both the head and the body tags are indented inside these HTML tags, it shows us at a glance that the head is inside the HTML element, and as is the body. But the body and the head, they're at the same hierarchical level. They're not inside of each other at all. And this is a good structure for us to be able to see at a glance what's happening in our code. And also when other programmers look at our code, because we're used to working with the same structure, it's easy to be able to understand what's going on at a glance. So you can see that there's one part of our code that breaks this rule, and that's this line here. Our H1 is contained inside our body element, and so it should be indented like so. And you can clearly see that this is now a child or contained inside the body tag. Now, if you didn't want to do that manually every single time, well, we actually installed a package right at the beginning that helps us with this organization. It's our little housekeeper, if you will. So if you go to Packages and go to Atom Beautify and click on Beautify, it will automatically beautify your entire code file to make all of the indents for you and to make everything look neat and tidy. So every so often, once your code starts getting messy, either learn the shortcut or go through it in the menu and reorganize your code file. It'll make it much easier on the eyes and much easier to read. So now I want to add my title under my H1 tag. And for this, I'm going to use the P tag, which is a paragraph tag. And the P tag formats text into a paragraph. So they get a new line and the text inside gets grouped together into the same paragraph. So let's add my title here. And now let's see what our changes look like. So remember again, Command S or Control S to save, and head back over to our site and Command R or Control R to refresh, or click this button to refresh. And there we go. There's our brand new paragraph showing up. Now, if we look at John Kleinberg's, you can see that his title is italicized and ours is not. So how can we make ours italicized as well? Well, this is where our lessons, our documentation is going to come in handy. Let's go ahead and go to Google and see if you can find out how to italicize your text using HTML. So let's write italicize HTML MDN and let's hit enter. And you can see that there's actually two tags that come up here. And the first one that comes up is this one. So let's have a look at it first. Now this is the EM or the emphasis element, and it marks text that has a stress emphasis. Now it looks like this in practice, and the result is that it makes it look italicized. Now you might have noticed back here, we also had the I element or the I tag, and it does the same thing visually. It also makes the text that's in between the I tags italicized. But there's a little bit of a difference here, and the difference is quite subtle. The emphasis tag tells the browser the words that are enclosed between it should be stressed or should be emphasized, but the I tag only italicizes the text, so it only styles the text to make it slanted, and it doesn't confer any of that emphasis. And for this reason, it's good practice to always use emphasis instead of italic because it conveys more information and it isn't just about the style. Remember, when we're writing HTML code, we're more concerned about structuring our text rather than caring about how it looks or how it appears. Now, a similar pair is the B tag or the bold tag. And this is equivalent to the I tag. It makes any text that's in between bolded, like so. But instead, what you should be using is the strong tag. And that's because the strong tag, again, confers meaning. It says that this text has strong importance, and therefore it's displayed in bold, rather than merely saying that this should be styled so that it's darker than the rest of the text. And if you're interested, you can have a read between bold and strong, as well as emphasis is strong, as well as emphasis in italic. It makes for some interesting reading and gives you a bit more background information on the difference between these two tags. But whenever you're looking to make something bold in your website, you should probably be using the strong tag. And whenever you want to make something italicized, you should be using the emphasis tag. So let's go ahead and make our paragraph, this title, italicized or emphasized like so. If you remember, all we have to do is just to enclose it inside the EM tag. Now you can do that for the entire length of the text, or you can simply apply it to just a section of the text. So for example, if I wanted to make the part where it says the app brewery bolded, then I can simply add a strong tag and have the app brewery, not including the full stop, inside this strong tag. Now, if I hit save and go ahead and refresh, then you can see that the entire paragraph is emphasized and the app brewery is bolded. So we've done a little bit of formatting for our website. Now let's move on to the next part. We're going to add a little bio here, and that again is going to be inside a paragraph element, and it just tells anybody who's visiting our personal site who we are and what we're all about. So once you're ready, go ahead and figure out where you should add this and complete the challenge. Okay, so that wasn't so hard. All we have to do is just to indent so we're in the right position, we're inside the body tag, and we're going to create a new paragraph element. So this is going to be on a new line from this paragraph. They're going to be separate paragraphs. And here I'm going to write, I am an iOS and web developer. I love coffee and brew my own beers. Let's save and check it out here. All right, looks pretty good. And we're getting pretty far already. So obviously you can put as much or as little as you want here and design your website however you want it to look. Now the next thing I want to add is this horizontal line, and we've done that previously. So you can go ahead and add that into your code file as a challenge. All right, so do you remember how to do that? Well, all we need to do is we're still staying inside the body because we're creating the content for our website. And all we need to do is just to create a horizontal rule. So I'm going to use my good friend AutoSuggest, and I'm going to write HR and hit enter to insert a new horizontal rule. And now it's looking pretty similar to what we've got here. Now the last thing I want to add is a subtitle where I'm going to list all the books and courses that I'm teaching. Go ahead and add a level 3 heading to your website underneath the horizontal rule and call it books and teaching, or if you don't have any books and teaching, you can simply call it education and list all the schools that you've attended. All right, underneath the horizontal rule, I'm going to add an H3, so level 3 heading, and this is going to be the books and teaching. All right, so we've already got most of our personal site coded up. In the next lesson, we're going to be diving into HTML lists and how we can create these bullet points as well as numbered points and add it to our website. So all of that and more, I will see you on the next lesson. All right, so in the last lesson, we created the start of our beautiful personal website. and we're modeling off John Kleinberg's homepage. So the next step that we want to achieve is this. How do we put in a bullet list into our website so that we can list maybe the books and courses that we're teaching, in my case, or it could be your education background, which schools you attended, what degrees you attained, what courses you've completed, etc. So that's the next challenge. If you want, you can pause the video here and try to work it out yourself using MDN and Google search. Alternatively, you can follow along with me and we're going to go through the same process. So we're looking for a bullet list, maybe, and it's going to be in HTML. That's the language we want to write it in. And I'm going to use MDN as my documentation source. So if you hit enter, you can see that the first one that comes up is the UL element, and that's exactly what we want. UL stands for unordered list. So essentially a bullet point list. Now, ordered list would be something that has, A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3. But in our case, this is exactly what we want. And you can see that this is a simple example which will render like so, where the UL tag encloses all the parts that will be included in the bullet list, and the LI tag, or the list item tag, encloses each and every bullet point. Alternatively, you have a slightly more complex, more nested unordered list, and that looks more like this. So let's go ahead and add this to our code. So we've got this H3 that is the subtitle for the books and courses that we're teaching. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new UL, unordered list, and a new list item. And I'll add something like the complete iOS app development bootcamp. And then I'll go ahead and add another one, the complete and if we again hit save and check it out, you can see that they are there as an unordered list or as bullet points. All right, cool. So the next thing that I want to add is outside of the unordered list, I'm going to add another H3, and this is going to have the subtitle of, let's say, my hobbies. And here I want to have an ordered list that's 1, 2, 3, and it's going to list some of my hobbies. So can you try and use MDN as well as search to figure out how to do that and then list your hobbies in that ordered list? All right, so let's walk through it together. If we have a look at unordered list, if you scroll to the bottom, there's usually a part where it says see also on MDN, and this tells you these related HTML elements, which are list items and the ordered list, the OL. So let's click on that and we can see how this works. This is a simple example of an ordered list, and you've got the first, second, and third item as list items. So the format is exactly the same as the unordered or the bullet list, apart from the fact that this time we're replacing UL with OL. And similarly, you can nest these lists. You can nest a ordered list inside an unordered list, and also vice versa. And there's a whole bunch of modifications that you can have with your ordered list, for example, using Roman numerals instead of using numbers. And let's go ahead and put it into practice on our website. So I'm going to list a whole bunch of hobbies under a ordered list. And the first list item is going to be, let's say, beer brewing. And the next one will be martial arts. And the last one can be motorcycles. There we go. Cool. So those are my hobbies, and they're included under an ordered list inside list items. And if we go ahead and hit save and then hit refresh, you can see that we've got our ordered list and our unordered list inside our homepage. All right, cool. So this lesson was all about HTML lists. If you're interested, you can have a look at some of these other types of lists, such as the ordered lists which start at a particular number, or the lists that use Roman numerals, and you can mess around with that code inside your playbook or inside your website. In the next lesson, we're going to be covering the image element, and we're going to be brightening up our website with some pictures. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. All right, so in the last lesson, we looked at how to use HTML lists that were ordered as well as unordered. In this lesson, I want to talk about the image element and how we can incorporate images into our website. So the image tag is, again, a self-closing tag, so it doesn't need to be closed. But for the image element, just providing an image tag isn't enough. You also need to specify the source, and that's the source of the image that will be displayed. That can either be a URL, so it can fetch it from the internet, or it can be a local image that's included in the same directory as your website. So we're going to look at both types. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for an image of myself online, and let's have a look to see if there's any images that are actually me. Oh, there we go. So I've already found one. So this comes from my Twitter. And you can also probably go to your own Twitter or your Facebook, and you can right-click on the image and simply copy the image address. Now, if I paste it here, you can see the whole URL of where that image is located. And if I hit enter, my browser will fetch that image from that location. But now, if I copy this image address or image source and I add it to my website as a HTML element, so just above my H1, so just above my name here, I want my image to show up. So I'm going to use the image tag, and the source, I'm just going to paste in that URL that I got from earlier on. Now, the next attribute here that comes up automatically is the alt, or the alternative text. And this is a case for, say, if a browser can't render the image, then it will simply display an alternative text to the user to describe what that image was about. So I'll just put the alt text as Angela profile picture. Now, if you're interested in search engine optimization and getting your website ranking for certain keywords, this is something that Google looks at to try and figure out what your web page is about. So if you're making a web page that's about burrito recipes and you add an alt text that says finished burrito product image 1, then it helps Google to index and figure out that maybe your web page is related when somebody is searching for burrito recipes. All right, so let's hit save and let's refresh and check it out. And I've now incorporated my first image onto my personal website. So you can either look around for an image of yourself on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere that would host it. Alternatively, if you can't find any images of yourself on the web, which is probably a good thing, you can also create an account on Photobucket and upload your own picture in order to get a URL. And after you do so, you can simply click on the image and right-click to copy the image address and paste it into your source between the quotation marks. It will work exactly the same. There we go. Angela is now a box of biscuits. Great. Now, when my browser looks through this file to see how it should load it up and display it, when it comes across this image tag, it has to go and ping the servers of Twitter to try and obtain this image. And if it gets permission to download this image, then it will grab that image and display it over here. So currently, my image is hosted on Twitter's servers, and my browser has to download it from there in order to display it inside my web page. Now, what if Twitter goes down? What if they die? What if nobody wants to send tweets anymore? Well, then their server is going to be shut down, and my image will no longer be available for download And you will instead end up with something that looks a little bit like this. And you might have come across it in the past when you've been loading up websites. It means that the image is no longer available or is no longer hosted at the address that's specified in the source. So in order to remove our reliance on Twitter, we can also put an image into our folder HTML personal site and refer to it inside our source. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, if I go onto my desktop inside web development, inside the folder HTML personal site, I can drag and drop or paste an image of me into this folder. And now my index.html and my picture called angela.png is in the same folder, and I can refer to it inside my code. So instead of using a web address as the source of my image, I can simply refer to the file name because they are at the same level. So index.html and angela.png are at the same hierarchical level. They're both inside my site. Now, if I had an images folder and I put my image into there, then I would have to add a path to get there. So it would be something like this. Both ways work, and you can do it either way you like. And now if you hit save and you go to my site, you'll notice this image change from square, which is what it got from Twitter, to circular, which is what it got from my local file. Now, in my case, I'd cropped my image to a circle using Photoshop. But if you wanted to create your own circular image, you can use a tool like crop-circle.imageonline.co. And here you'll be able to upload an image and crop the part of the image that you're interested and get it as a circle and be able to download it to use it in your website. And there we go. We've managed to brighten up our homepage by adding an image of ourselves to the top of it using the image tag, and we've started to look at these HTML attributes. And you can see that every single HTML element in the MDN reference also has a section on attributes. And we're really only touching the surface here because there's other attributes that you can add to the image element or most other elements that you decide to use. And we're going to be looking at these attributes as we come across them for different HTML elements. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to be looking at anchor tags and how we can start adding links into our website and how we can create new pages that can be linked to from our homepage. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Now, if we compare our current site against John Kleinberg's, the only major difference that you will see now is that his has a whole bunch of hyperlinks interspersed in the homepage, whereas ours is completely devoid of any hyperlinks. If we think back to what HTML stands for, we've talked about the markup language part already, but we haven't yet talked about the hypertext part of HTML. So hypertext is basically just a bunch of text documents that can be linked together using these hyperlinks. So when you click on one of them, it takes you to a different text document, and then you click on a link there and it takes you to another different text document. And that's where the HT part of HTML comes from. And in fact, if you're interested, there is even a game called the Wiki Game, where you have a starting Wikipedia article and a goal Wikipedia article, and you have to click through the links on Wikipedia to try and navigate to the goal article. And it's basically an association game that's played using hyperlinks. Now, what are these links made of? If you have a look at each and every one of these links, if you right-click on it and click Inspect, you know that you can bring up the Google Chrome developer tools. And if we have a look, you can see that it's actually pointing towards a tag with a hyperlink reference to the destination that this link is going to take you to. And before the A tag gets closed, that's the link text. So in this case, it's the word computer science that gets underlined. And when you click on it, it takes you to cs.cornell.edu. Let's go ahead and implement this for our website. So there's many places where maybe you'd want to direct people away. So maybe I can link them to the App Brewery's website here. Or I could show them examples of me brewing beer or me riding motorcycles. Let's go ahead and try that in code. So the first place that I want to add a link to is this part where it says the App Brewery. So I'm going to put an A tag or an anchor tag just in front and close the A tag just behind. And if you want to have a look at the structure of the anchor tag, then as you remember, you can always go to the MDN web docs and you can read all about the anchor element and all of its attributes. Now, the main attribute that we're going to be concerned with is the href. And this is a URL that the hyperlink is going to point to, or the destination of that hyperlink. In my case, the destination is going to be appbrewery.co. And if I just copy that, then I can head over here and add an A tag or an anchor tag just before where it says the App Brewery. And this is what the autofill is going to write for me. So let's have a look at the structure in a bit more detail. As with the other HTML elements we've seen, the anchor tag has the A as the element name. And then the most important attribute that you're going to find yourself using is the href. And this is set to equal the link destination. So where are you going to take your user when they click on this link? And the anchor tag is not a self-closing tag, so it has a closing tag at the end. And between the open tag and the closing tag is our link text. So that's the bit of text that's going to be underlined and highlighted in blue so that the user knows that when they click on this word, this is going to take them to that link. So in our case, our href is going to be this URL. And between the open anchor tag and the closing anchor tag, we're going to put the link text, so the bit of text that's going to be underlined. And in my case, I'm just going to cut this phrase here and put it inside the anchor tag. So now you can see there's actually two sets of HTML elements that enclose this line of text. It is simultaneously going to be strong, i.e. bolded, and it's also going to act as a link to the appbrewery.co website. So if we hit save and let's go back over here and hit refresh, you can see that this has now been underlined and it's highlighted in a different color. Now, by convention, the highlight is going to be blue if it's a link that we've never clicked on, and it's going to be purple if we have clicked on it in the past. And just to confirm, if we click on it, it takes us to appbrewery.co. Brilliant. So that's working as expected. Now, why don't you go ahead and add some links to your hobbies? So, you know how they say in interviews you should always prove that you've done what you say you've done? Go ahead and add some links, maybe to images on the internet or to YouTube videos, anything that you like. And it doesn't have to be in your hobbies. It could be in your books and teaching or education or any part of your website, basically. So go ahead and pause the video and add some more links. So adding links to the ordered list or the unordered list is exactly the same as what we've done up here. So I'm going to go ahead and add an anchor tag to beer brewing. So I'm going to hit enter to create my anchor tag. I'm going to put the words beer brewing in between my anchor tag so that will act as the link text. And my href is going to be a YouTube video that I've got where I show people my beer brewing. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste it into here. And then I'm going to add another anchor tag here just to fill up the motorcycle part. All right, so now I've added two links, one for beer brewing and one for the word motorcycles, both inside my ordered list. So if we hit save and we hit refresh, then you'll see we've now got two links, and they're blue because we've never clicked on it before. So if I hold down the Command button on my keyboard or Control on Windows and click on each of these links, then they'll open up in new tabs, and we can have a look at my evidence that I have indeed done some beer brewing or motorcycling. Now that we've seen how to create some anchor tags that point to links on the internet, what if I wanted to create a separate page for the My Hobbies section, and I wanted to create a link that linked to my own page? Let's head back into Atom, and inside this HTML personal site folder where we've got our index.html, so this file, I'm going to right click and I'm going to click New File. And the new file is going to be called hobbies.html. And it's going to be created inside the same folder as index. So you can see they're at the same hierarchical level. Now for hobbies HTML, I'm first going to add the HTML boilerplate code. And the title is going to be My Hobbies. In the body, I'm just going to copy all of this, and I'm going to hit Command X or Control X to cut. And then I'm going to paste it over here. So now if I hit save for hobbies and I go back to the index.html and I create a new anchor tag, and it's going to have the link text of my hobbies, and the href is going to be the file name. So in this case, it will be hobbies.html. Now if I hit save and I go back to my website, hit refresh, that ordered list has disappeared and is now replaced by this hyperlink. And if I click on it, it takes me to this brand new page that I've created called My Hobbies. So now you can see how you can really easily start to create multiple pages of your website. And as long as you've got it inside the same folder, or you can specify a path for the browser to get to it, then you can start linking up your homepage with all of these different satellite pages, and you start to build up a website rather than just a web page. As a challenge, I want you to create another page that is going to contain your contact details. So how do you get in touch? So say if somebody came across your personal site and they wanted to hire you or they wanted to message you. Now, it's probably quite cluttering to have it on the home page. So we want to create another link down here that says contact me. And it's going to link to another page just like My Hobbies, but it's going to contain maybe your address, maybe your email, maybe your telephone, whatever you're comfortable with giving to the internet. Go ahead, pause the video and give it a go. All right, so it's going to be exactly the same as what we did for My Hobbies. So we're going to go to our HTML personal site folder. We're going to right click on it. We're going to create a new file, and this is going to be called contactme.html. And here we're going to again start with the HTML boilerplate, and the title is going to be Contact Me. And in the body, we're going to have an H1, that's my contact details. And then below that, maybe a paragraph. That's going to be my fictional address. And maybe another one that's going to be some fictional number, telephone number to contact me with. And then it will be my email at gmail.com. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit save, go back to index.html and add another anchor tag where we link to this page called contact-me.html. And the link text will just be contact me. And we're going to hit save and refresh. And now we can click on here to this brand new page. All right, so today's lesson was all about the anchor tag, And be sure to check out the anchor tag reference on MDN Web Docs. And there's a whole bunch of other attributes that you can read about. And there's really good examples that can show you some of the other functionality that you can have by simply including the anchor tag. So that's all from me for today. I will see you on the next lesson.